Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami, and it's been 1,000th day as far as the conflict in Ukraine is concerned, and the Ukrainians for the first time have used the US Army tactical missile systems inside the Russian territory, while Russia says its forces shot down 5 of the 6 of the missiles. Now this comes after US President Joe Biden granted permission to Ukraine to use long-range US missiles in the Russian territory. After that particular permission on the part of the US President Joe Biden, Russian President Vladimir Putin revised the Russian nuclear doctrine, and according to that doctrine, Russia may use nuclear deterrence to prevent aggression by the hostile powers and military blocs that possesses weapons of mass destruction or large arsenals of conventional weapons. Countries that provide their sovereign space for other parties to prepare and launch an attack against Russia are subject to the policy as well. An attack by a single member of a bloc, including one that does not have nuclear weapons, will be considered an attack by the entire collective. The same would apply where a nation that does not formally belong to a military organization is backed by a nuclear power. Now, this particular nuclear doctrine, this document lists 10 different threats, and we'll be, during the course of discussion, we'll be talking about those, taking the analysis over those as well. At the same time, we have seen State Department spokesman Matthew Miller saying that the US is not surprised by Russia lowering its threshold for a nuclear strike. Also, the State Department says, let me quote, that the US will continue to provide Ukraine the support it needs to succeed on the battlefield and prevail in its defense against Russia's aggression, unquote. At the same time, we have seen President-elect Donald Trump's closest supporters have termed this shift of the policy a cynical attempt to escalate the conflict. In today's program, we are going to take the analysis regarding as to what does this particular timing, this shift in the policy on the part of the Joe Biden's administration actually depict, and what does this revision of the Russia's nuclear doctrine means. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Ms. Naela Chohan, former ambassador and former Special Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Pakistan. Ms. Naela, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Almas, Haider Naqvi, Foreign Affairs expert. Mr. Naqvi, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later in the show, we'll be joined by another participant. As they join in, I'll be introducing them. Let me begin the discussion with you, Ms. Naela. First of all, let's talk about the timing or the possible motivations behind this grant of permission on part of President Joe Biden. How do you look at that? Firstly, the timing, and what could be the possible motivations as per your understanding?
Well, there could be several factors in it. As you know that Mr. Joe Biden's tenure ends on the 20th of January and Mr. Trump takes over. And President-elect Trump has stated clearly that he will bring an end to the Ukraine war in one day. So I think that at this moment, the Western powers are basically trying to gain maximum before the end of the war. And President Biden's giving permission to Ukraine to fire these missiles within the Russian territory and also sending them landmines is actually a reflection of that if Mr. Trump comes and says, okay, end of war, then the territories that are there with Russia will remain with Russia. And there will be no further negotiations on it. So they are basically wanting that whatever maximum gains Ukraine can have before the ceasefire is agreed, because we don't even know when President Trump takes over whether the negotiations will include Ukraine. It could be negotiations between Washington and Moscow. So I think that the Western allies like UK, like France, like other countries of the West and the Democrats want that maximum gains should be made before the end of the war.
Before any sort of a possible ceasefire talks happen when the President-elect Donald Trump takes over. But could there be another possibility? Could this particular shift in the policy be aimed at scuttling that very want, the desire on the part of former President, now the President-elect Donald Trump, to end this war altogether? Because after this particular decision, we have seen the revision of the nuclear doctrine on the part of the Russians also. Don't you think this particular shift is naturally going to lead to a certain area where ceasefire or the talks associated with that might become impossible, even with the new administration in place, no matter how much desire they carry with that?
I am not sure about that, because I think that Mr. Putin is also playing a strategic game. The so-called missile that was fired, the West has still not confirmed if it was intercontinental ballistic, ICBM. It was a missile with a long range, right? Why is there a controversy on that? Basically, it was a deterrence to United States that if you further fuel the fire, our missiles can reach, because ICBM has a range of 5,500 kilometers. So, they can easily enter into US territory. So, that was, I think, a deterrence action as far as Putin is concerned. And then this new doctrine also, the points that you have raised, have basically told the Western powers who are not directly in front, but are sending their troops, their arms to Ukraine to fight, that if you further escalate, we will then be fighting with you,
right,
not with Ukraine.
Your point is well taken. I just want to continue with the first point. Let me bring in Mr. Almas Naqvi into the discussion also. I'll come to this particular point. I'll try to bring in those very important points in the revised nuclear doctrine of Russians. Mr. Naqvi, what do you think? What could be the possible motivation at this particular point in time when the transition is going on? We will be seeing a new president of the United States of America on 20th of January. And we have also seen criticism from the closest Trump supporters. I'll come to that particular point. But firstly, what could be the immediate possible motivation on the part of Biden administration in order to grant that permission of the US long-range missiles inside the Russian territory?
Jawad, as Ambassador Chohan mentioned, that the maximum gain is the basic motivation might be for the Biden administration. But I would like to add one more point in this stage, that this is the first time in 100,000 days of war that escalation jumped into the next level or next ladder of the escalation. So this is a very serious and dangerous. For Kremlin, from my understanding, it doesn't matter who is in the White House. Their objectives and their goals are clear. Or the two goals are the basic: denazification and demilitarization. So I don't think so Kremlin will compromise on that. As far as the timing is concerned, definitely it's a very important in a way, as President-elect has no role at this moment, and outgoing administration want to set the stage for the new administration. So what will be the stage? Definitely now the war is entered into the next ladder. Now
that's very interesting point that you setting the stage for the new administration. How do you explain that? Because the desire of the former president, new president-elect Donald Trump, remains to be that he wants to end this particular war, and he's been through his election campaign. He's been saying that I'll end this war within 24 hours. So all eyes were set as soon as Trump would take the presidency, there might be an immediate end to this particular war. But this escalation, so what sort of a stage has been set by the Biden administration in terms of giving that stage to the new incoming administration?
At the stage, I think this sort of permissions to allow Ukrainian administration to launch long-range missiles into the Russian territory means it's in a serious and risky provocations. You know, as the President Putin in response has signed the document to modify its nuclear doctrine, and that lower the threshold of the nuclear usage. So it means it's in a very serious, it's not bluff in my understanding.
So what do you mean when you say that it's all about setting a stage for the new administration?
So in case,
especially given a fact that there has been a desire on the part of President Trump to go away from the war and to resolve this issue.
For example, if Kremlin or the Russians they fire some heavy yield missiles into the Ukrainian territory, and that damage more than expectation. And you know, today this is a very important and important, I think, the element that Maria Zakharova threatened Poland, that Poland missile defense base is also among the targets of, and you know, the Poland is member of the NATO. So this is the stage, what I am saying, that will be.
So that particular stage already being set by Joe Biden's administration, would there be a welcome gesture when it comes to the new administration taking over? I'll come back to you for this particular point to be discussed a little in detail. Let me bring in another participant, Dr. Shazia Anwer Cheema, joining us on Skype, international relations expert. Dr. Shazia, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Firstly, what could be the possible motivations when we see this transition period underway, and in January we'll be seeing the new administration taking over with the president who has a desire to end this particular war. So this particular grant of permission of use of long-range missiles inside Russian territory on the part of Joe Biden's administration, what could be the possible motivations?
That we have to look at the timeline of a couple of events, at least for past 3 months, the events of past 3 months. We've seen that Zelensky is going place to place with a peace plan, stating that that peace plan has a secret classified annex. And then we see that that classified annex got out open in the public, and it stated that Zelensky is asking for nuclear weapons and also threatening his own allies that if he will not be provided the nuclear weapon, he has the capacity and ability to create his own, like Ukrainians' own nuclear weapon. Then we have this hustle and bustle of elections, and meanwhile Keir Starmer goes to US for the proposal of allowing the same long-range attacks on Russia, but was denied from Pentagon. And then election, and during the election somewhere, in my understanding, this attack which has happened yesterday, the day before yesterday, was actually planned, because these attacks cannot be planned in days or even weeks. It requires at least a month or so with the coordination, with the support and supervision of the US intelligence and the personnels. So, your point, like what was the point of doing that? The point is that US and broader West is so much invested in this project Ukraine that now they have this face-keeping issue, and it's very difficult for them to get out of it just like that. And they know that it's not a stalemate. We have been listening on the Western media for like months that it's a stalemate, but they have to admit it, and now they are admitting it, it's not a stalemate. Ukraine is losing and losing badly. And then we heard the story of North Koreans being in the Kursk, and we got the impression that this long-range missiles will be will attack Kursk, but on the contrary, the attack was on the Bryansk region. And what was the result? Like the 6 missiles were fired and 5 was destroyed, and the 6th was damaged, and the debris just
for the interjection over here, Dr. Shazia. So what about the deployment of North Korean officials, has there been any substantial evidence, any substantive evidence, in fact, on the horizon that can actually tell that there has been a deployment of the North Korean, because it's the South Korean spy agency, and one of the officials of South Korean spy agency is of the view that there has been a deployment, but still the determination of this particular fact on the part of that spy agency has to be done. What's your understanding?
Yeah, so by having this timeline in our mind, so we know that this situation is not that it's not like overnight and Biden all of a sudden came out of the Amazon jungles and decided to do that. It has been done already. And so for your question of North Koreans, there are reports that North Koreans are in Russia because Russia has a defense and strategic agreement with North Korea. And North Korean soldiers are all the time in the Russian military universities and for the training and all other their personal reasons. We have no report that North Koreans are actively fighting in the battleground in the Kursk, because Western media is reporting that there were 50,000 North Korean soldiers. Now I'm hearing that there are 100,000 North Korean soldiers. Then there was this special this special decision of attacking deep into Russia was just to deter North Korea, but then again the attack was not even on the region of Kursk, it was an other region. So I don't have any substantiated report that North Koreans are there, but yes, we cannot negate the idea that North Koreans in the defense universities, in the training centers, there could be North Koreans, and even if North Koreans are there to help, like let's
Shazia, if there is no substantive report present regarding to the presence and the deployment of the North Koreans over there in Kursk region, and this particular attack that you've already mentioned happened in a different Bryansk region. So is it a good move on the part of Joe Biden's administration, just based on the unsubstantiated reports, to grant that permission of the use of long-range missiles?
It's a bad move considering even if the North Koreans are present there, let's hypothesize they are present there, even then it's a wrong move, because Russia and North Korea have the defense agreement, and Kursk is Russian territory. It's not that disputed territory of Donbas and Zaporozhye and all the territories which Russia recently has acquired. So Kursk is the pre-2014 border. So Russia has the right, the international right, to call for the alliances if Russia has been attacked inside the Russian territory. So the attack from the Ukrainian inside the Kursk back 2 months ago, it was the attack on the territory of Russia. So for every reason, it is the Russian red line. In the Western media, there are around 50 Russian red lines, but Russia has never mentioned that we have 50 red lines. They have just 2 red lines: no long-range missiles and no NATO. So now broader West, they have crossed this one red line, and we will see how Russia is going to react. In my opinion, Russia will
come to this particular point of how the reaction so far on the part of the Russians been. Dr. Shazia, please stay with us. Ms. Naela, now, do you think when there is unsubstantiated report, not confirmed report of North Korean soldiers being on the ground in Kursk region, do you consider it's a good move on the part of Biden's administration to grant that permission of the long-range missiles use?
Basically, in a war situation, there's a lot of propaganda and there's a lot of disinformation. But
disinformation on the part of the South Korean spy agency, an official from it saying that there has been deployment over it, and still they are determining as to how many number of troops have been deployed over there. So how do you differentiate that word coming from spies agency of South Korea and the disinformation part?
On the sidelines of G20 meeting also, these topics were discussed with President Xi also. and these claims were rejected. There is no evidence that there is whatever number, because there are different numbers that are being thrown, and like Dr. Shazia said, even if it was, it's not a justification to allow Ukraine. And you could see that President Zelensky said that I wish this permission was given to us 2 years ago. At tail end of the war, they are giving them permission to do so. But Mr. Zelensky is very clever. You see that in his tours that he is making and his speech at the UN also, he has tried using the terminology that President Trump uses to negotiate from a position of strength, to appeal to Mr. Trump that we need your help because we need to be strong to be able to negotiate. So let's see how it works out.
So do you think this particular mantra has been selling out well when it comes to the perception of the Westerns, because there's been relentless support, and now even there has been an increase of support on the part of the US administration towards Ukrainians, $275 million of aid, and the State Department says that will continue to provide aid to Ukrainians. So apparently it seems that mantra on the part of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is selling out well so far with the Westerns.
I doubt it. I doubt it, because you can see that even in the West, there is now falling out. The German, Chancellor has, he doesn't want to be part of this. The French and the UK leadership is supportive of this war. So there is, fragmentation in the West. So there is no one West now. There are different opinions in the West as well. And then look at the sanctions that Americans had put on Russia. There were about 16,500 sanctions against Russia to punish Mr. Putin. But it backfired because Putin had well calculated. Russia is a very big country. They produce their own goods. They have oil and gas. They have everything. They don't depend on the West. So these sanctions basically backfired on the West, because now the winter is setting in. They need that oil and gas, although they are trying to have alternate sources, but still it will be extremely expensive for them. And you can see that Mr. Putin has already spoken to the Iraqi head of the state also, to liaise the prices. So this, if West continues the way it is, I think it will be suicidal for them. But as far as United States is concerned, it's just a matter of 2 months. Mr. Trump might have totally a different perspective to this whole situation.
Right, I'll come to this particular point also. What could be the possible future scenario in that particular regard after Trump takes over? Mr. Naqvi, you already were of the view that perhaps this particular move is to gain the maximum, and if any sort of future talks regarding the ceasefire happen, to go into those from a position of strength. Do you think this particular move, the actual firing of the long-range missiles inside the Russian territory, would actually help Ukrainians get an advantage on the battlefield against the Russians?
I don't think so. This long missile strikes will provide an incentive to gain maximum in the negotiation, because at this moment Russians are controlling the escalation. They dominate the escalation. They know how to maneuver and manage. They are not at the losing side. So I don't think so they can create any sort of leverage. It's in a frustration before the transition, the formal power transition. This is my view. As far as the objective, Kremlin is clear. Kremlin wants Ukraine neutral. This is the simplest. No NATO expansion to the eastward. So this is the simple and one way.
That's pretty much clear on the part of the Russians.
Yes.
No expansion of NATO and Ukraine being the neutral. Do Ukrainians also think on the same line? Because if this particular war ends after Trump comes in, I mean, what would be the position or the standing of Ukraine after this much of conflict?
Up till now, I think Zelensky wants to engage the Western capitals, and he is trying to convince them, and did it in the past and during the Biden administration. Let's see how it responds to the ideas of Trump's, because every party have their own interest. For example, the Ukrainians are thinking the peace negotiation, if there is, they have their own terms. They want to their territory back, and they want to reinstate their sovereignty. They will definitely plead for. But the Russian perspective may be a little bit different. They don't want. They're not ready to abandon the occupied territories,
Right.
including the Crimea. So in this case, the Biden administration, they have their own interest, and even the Western capitals. So every party have their own interest in, if there is end game. I'm not sure that it's in a so simple. Let's see. It depends upon how the Trumps
So
respond.
you were already of the view that it's in the hands of the Russians to either escalate or de-escalate the situation, if I
Yes.
got that correctly.
Yes.
Okay, so Dr. Shazia was of the view earlier that it has become difficult for the US. It has become difficult for them to get out of this. We've seen also now more aid coming to Ukrainians. State Department also announcing $275 million just most recently. Do you think Russians have a complete edge in this particular conflict? And Ukrainians, despite no matter how much backing they've got from the Western backers, they've been losing to a great extent.
I think this is the frustration. This is the reason that Zelensky wants and plead his case, even the UN and even the Washington. He tries to convince to the Western capitals that how this war is dangerous for Ukrainians and even for the democracy. So he did his best, but I don't think so it served much to the Ukrainian current regime.
Right. Let me bring in Dr. Shazia also into the discussion. Dr. Shazia, you already were of the view that it has become difficult to get out of it. Now, we have also seen another announcement of $275 million on the part of an announcement on the part of the State Department, and a number of other military equipment that are being directed towards the Ukrainians also. Firstly, I just want to ask, with the use of these long-range missiles, do you think the position of Ukraine is going to become better on the battlefield? And what does this particular new military aid towards Ukraine actually depict, when specifically you were of the view that it has become difficult for the US to get out of it?
Mr. Jawad, point is that, I'm not a defense analyst, but all the defense analysts of the world are saying that no matter how much you support in terms of kind and cash to Ukraine, the situation on ground cannot be changed, because even Tony Blinken, after announcing that he has this remaining amount with the previous government and they are planning to send it within 2 months. It could have been delayed. It could have been spanning over 6 months or in installments the way they were doing before. But they have decided all of that sudden to transport and whatever they have within the next 2 months, meaning by inauguration of the next, before the inauguration of the next president. And in the same breath, he also said that we don't think that these aids are going to help Ukraine, because Ukraine needs manpower and Ukraine must decide to induct the soldiers below age 18. So that's the ground reality, and that's what we are heading to. It's the slogan that we will fight for the Ukraine till the last Ukrainian standing. So why don't you fight till the last Brit or French or American standing. I mean, why you are fighting a proxy war on the cost of Ukrainians with the bribe of being a NATO partner or being a EU member? So, and broader West knows that these two things are not going to happen. And there is another panic and chaos as well, that we have the proposed new Trump government, Trump cabinet is extremely pro-Iranian and Chinese hawk, and they have no interest in Europe or as far as in Ukraine and Russia. So they want to put all these issues on the back burner. And that's why we are looking at the hastening of the things, that people are in the Pentagon or in the Brussels, they are in panic and they want to do and they want to create
Shazia, point well taken. I'll have to go on a very quick short break. After this particular break, we'll resume the discussion from here. For that, stay tuned. Welcome back to Views on News. In today's program, we are discussing as the situation that is developing as far as the Ukrainian conflict is concerned. We are joined in the studio by Ms. Naela Chohan, Mr. Almas, Haider Naqvi. Online, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Shazia Anwer Cheema. Before going on the break, we were having the view from Dr. Shazia. Dr. Shazia, now, when the new Trump administration takes over there in the United States of America, let me bring in a couple of quotes from the closest supporters of President-elect Donald Trump. Donald Trump Jr. saying regarding this particular change on the part of Biden administration was aimed at getting World War III going before his father has a chance to create peace and save lives. Likewise, Trump's pick for National Security Advisor, U.S. Representative Mike Waltz, called it another step to the escalation ladder. So the question is, that this particular escalation goes to a certain point, don't you think it would become very difficult for the new Trump administration to undo all those things that have already happened and they might be happening during this particular transition period in particular?
It will leave Trump with two choices: either take it as the face value and say, like, I am ready for any negotiation on the terms of Russia, because the negotiations, in the future negotiations or peace talk, are going to be on the Russian terms because they are on the winning side. Or he has the other option to continue escalation. And as we have seen his new cabinet, like Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, John Radcliffe, Elise Stefanik, they are all parroting China and Iran, China and Iran. They are not peace lovers. They are again the same warmongers mentality, but they do not want to go toward Europe and they want to abandon NATO to some extent, and they want to continue toward China and Iran specifically. So this will be a very deep mess for Trump, in a way that it will be very difficult for him to get out of it, because the response from Russia is not going to be symmetrical. Russia is not going to nuke the Western capitals in retaliation. There is complete silence in Kremlin, and whenever in the past we have seen that there is a silence for a week or so, there is always it accompanied with some kind of actions and decisive actions. So let's see how Putin decided to react to these retaliatory attacks. But what these attacks have achieved, I mean, these attacks have achieved the same amount of knowledge that the Western deterrence is below zero, and Western equipment can do nothing with Russian army. So the Western missiles, I mean, these are ATACMS. Let's start using the Storm Shadows and Taurus and Scouts, and take all the European, German and French, all the missiles, and start using them. The only thing which will become out of the surface is that Russia has the capability to deter it. And this is also not a good sign.
The capability to deter, and the response you think is not going to be symmetrical. And with this revision of the nuclear doctrine, whatever it stipulates. I'll come back to you for your detailed view regarding that also. Ms. Naela, now by looking at this particular statement by Donald Trump Jr. saying that this change was aimed at getting the World War III going before my father has a chance to create peace and save lives. I mean, isn't it a big statement, World War III? So don't you think if the situation reaches to such a point of escalation, things are going to be really difficult for even Donald Trump's administration to handle?
That remains to be seen because it's just 2 months away. How much escalation can take place? It's difficult to predict, but if the West and the current American government continue to fuel the fire, President Putin has very categorically stated that, like Dr. Naqvi also said, the threshold has been lowered by President Putin, which means that he can go for all-out war if the West does not curtail its provocation.
So this lowering of the threshold of use of nuclear weapon, is it just a warning, or can we see Russia resorting to an actual nuclear strike?
That depends on how the West heeds to the warning or not. But I don't think he's bluffing.
But the State Department says the US is not surprised by this lowering of the threshold on the part of the Russians. So what does that depict? It means they're not taking it seriously? So they're going to continue with whatever the strategy has already been?
Well, that's the whole, posturing game in wars that parties do. But I'm sure they're very careful about what is going on. And as we were talking before also, there are many factors and there are many players in it who are not in front, who are behind the screen. And we just hope that the warnings that Mr. Putin, because earlier on, how did this war start? If you recall, President Putin had categorically stated that Ukraine will be neutral, it will not become part of NATO, and the West will refrain from including it in NATO. But then they started this whole provocation, giving Ukraine arms, enticing it to become part, and yet they haven't. They haven't included Ukraine in EU or NATO. And that's why President Zelensky is also frustrated. So the people he depended on for escalating the war, he realizes that they are not the most dependable of allies. So I hope good sense prevails on Mr. Zelensky, and I hope that Mr. Putin's warnings will be heeded by the West. Otherwise, I agree with Mr. Trump Jr. that it can escalate.
Okay, so what about this particular statement, the document that which it stipulates, an attack by a single member of a bloc, including one that does not have nuclear weapons, will be considered an attack by the entire collective. The same would apply where a nation that does not formally belong to a military organization is backed by a nuclear power. So that clearly gives us a depiction of Ukraine in this particular case.
Yes, Ukraine, EU and USA. So, and of course UK as well, because when Putin in his new nuclear doctrine states that a country without nuclear weapons, obviously it's Ukraine, because earlier on they had nuclear weapons, but they surrendered their nuclear capability, trusting the West to protect them, which didn't happen. Now, if they are backed by countries like Britain, by France, by other NATO members, then Mr. Putin will consider it a war not with Ukraine, but with these powers that are abettors at this moment. They will then become direct parties, which these parties were refraining from. They are just pushing Ukraine in the front, but are not coming in front themselves. And Mr. Putin has cautioned that if they continue with this policy, then they are going to be roped in. They can't be behind the screen abettors. And same goes for United States. that now they are sending missiles, they are sending mines, but if they continue to do so and they cross the red line, then it will be a possible direct interaction, God forbid. So, let us hope that in these 2 months this escalation does not reach that level.
Right, Mr. Naqvi, unfortunately we're short of time, lots of aspects we discussed later so far. Now, very quick closing comment regarding as to State Department's reaction to this lowering of threshold on the part of the Russians. They say they are not surprised by it. What does that mean?
I think they're not taking it seriously, but I do understand it's in a very serious development.
It's a serious development. So, can we expect a likelihood of any nuclear strike on the part of Russians?
Yes, of course. President Putin has signed a decree of modification of the new conditions under the nuclear doctrine. And the conditions are the crucial condition, as you read, and what I read, that an attack from non-nuclear state, if backed from by nuclear doctrine, will be treated as a joint assault on Russia. So it is very clear, and
so as per your understanding, there could be a highly likelihood of Russian doing a nuclear strike.
It's not bluff. Some people say in the Western capital they're trying to portray it as in a bluff, nuclear bluff by the Putin, but I don't think so. It's in
right, Dr. Shazia, your quick last closing comment. You already said the response from Russians is not going to be symmetrical. Do we expect a real nuclear strike if the escalation continues to grow?
I mean, it's a very difficult. Real nuclear strike is going to be end of the world. So I don't think if it will be a real nuclear strike, we will be here to discuss the things that we are discussing right now. It's a very bleak, very dire situation, and I do not wish, I do not want to foresee
the fact
that
Donald Trump Jr. is saying that this particular shift is aimed at leading the world to the World War III.
I think he most probably is mentioning about his own situation, domestic situation, because they are again fighting inside with the blob, the deep state, with the deep state, so that they have their own fight to fight. They are again facing the same situation which Trump has faced in his previous tenure. So they have selected people who are from the deep state and they are anti the deep state. So there is going to be a huge overhauling inside the US establishment. So this is a
We are short of time. Dr. Shazia Anwer, Cheema, international relations expert. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Ms. Naela Chohan, former ambassador, former special secretary of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Pakistan. Thank you very much for your time. Mr. Almas, Haider Naqvi, Foreign Affairs expert. Mr. Naqvi, thank you very much for your time. Also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.